Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks for tuning back in to another episode of Crypto Hot Seat, the only interview show that matters in crypto. Our guest today is Mr. John Crane. John is the CEO of SuperRare. SuperRare is basically an NFT boutique art studio doing what it can to build the future of the art market. John, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
So let's start a little bit at the beginning here, because you got SuperRare off the ground in late 2017, before the crypto community at large was really talking about NFTs with any kind of passion. What was it like over the past year to see NFTs suddenly explode? What was it like to be into the band before they were big?
It was certainly surreal. When we got involved, I started paying attention when the, ERC 721 was published. I thought it was really interesting. I had always been wondering, when does Web3 hit the consumer web? And it felt like NFTs were the first thing that really, I thought that would stick. I've kind of thought about them as the Trojan horse of crypto, where you show up for the art and collectibles and you stay for the DeFi degen stuff. And, it was surreal last year, right? Like the Beeple sale happened in March and everyone was astounded. And I thought there would be more ups and downs in the market, and it really just kind of continued to grow throughout the whole year. It was very surprising at the speed at which it kind of jumped from crypto Twitter to, the front page of CNN or wherever, just kind of like normie, no coiner news.
So you mentioned that Beeple news, and I forget the exact figure. It was something like $60 million. He sold that collection.
I think it was 69.
A nice chunk of change for an artist, for sure. What was your experience of that news? I have to imagine that was very validating to be like, oh, this guy just made a bunch of money doing a version of what we're doing. What was your experience of that huge Beeple news?
It was just totally surreal. It was something I got into this space, like part of the initial thought behind SuperRare was that the art market had all of these artificial constraints, and there was a big opportunity to take, the interesting part of collecting art, kind of digitize it and open it up to a much broader audience. You've got some, beautiful paintings. It looks like behind you there on the wall.
Yeah.
But there's not a big secondary market for, kind of like the middle of the market, or definitely not the long tail of art, right? Like the real market is like a very select very select artists, and also a very thin kind of select group of collectors. And so seeing the Beeple sale was, on the one hand, very validating, right? It was like, we had this thesis that digital art could, be a big part of the art market, if not actually bigger than kind of the contemporary art market itself. And so I think we're getting to see that play out in real time.
Yeah, man. So your work background has some conventional crypto experience in it, but I'm curious about any particular stripe you might have to the art world. What was your relationship like with art, and how did you discover? How did you encounter this intersection between art and crypto?
Yeah, so I was always personally into drawing. I was like a big doodler growing up. And when I was in college, I learned about processing the programming. It's kind of like a generative art programming language, which was super fun. I was astounded. Like someone showed me it, and I felt like it was doodling on steroids, right? You could draw 1,000 random circles in a second, with a quick for loop. And that was just amazing for me. It was kind of like, it sort of shifted the course of my career. I was studying architecture at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I've always, kind of been passionate about the space. I like just art generally. I never saw myself as, trying to be a fine artist, but always had interests. I was kind of on the periphery of the art scene in New York. So I lived in Brooklyn for a while. I had friends who were trying to make it, as artists, kind of like playing the gallery art fair game. And so it was near and dear to my heart. I was, collected art from my friends. And in the back of my mind, I always had this question, it's really interesting. Everybody has well-defined musical tastes, so people can say, oh, I like jazz, I like EDM, I don't like, punk or country or whatever it is. Like they have a way to articulate that. And if you think about visual art, people are just like, or often folks are just like, the prints that IKEA sells, they're pretty good. It fills the white space on my wall. And I just thought that was very interesting. And I felt like there's an opportunity to, if you make this market accessible to a broad audience, people can kind of find their tribe in visual art. And so I think that's what we're seeing play out.
It seems like that tribe is growing in population very quickly. And can we talk a little bit about Art Basel? Because I have formed the theory that as of last year, Art Basel is now a crypto event. And you were there. Could you talk a little bit about what it was like to have boots on the ground? It was in Miami, yeah?
Yep, it was in Miami. So Art Basel does, I think, they're all over. They have one in Basel, Switzerland, but they do a few. And one of the big ones, or the big one in the United States, is in Miami in December. So last year we came down with the team. We actually installed a 23-foot LED rectangle and had art going on that 24/7, which was super cool. And it was definitely the crypto takeover of the event. This is my first time going, so it was super exciting. It was kind of like on my list of things to do. We had hoped to come in 2020. Obviously, COVID changed that plan. But the big, I went to the fairs. We actually had a booth at one of them, which was great. I think, Art Basel is a well-produced art fair. But a lot of it was palpable energy in the air, like around NFTs and around crypto. And I think that's not going to go away.
Yeah. So it's certainly not going away, and your company is harnessing some meaningful attention here. Could you talk to us a little bit about what's going on with Adidas and Prada, as well as many other brands and well-known artists, but Adidas and Prada seem to stand out here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Adidas and Prada teamed up with actually one of my favorite generative artists, Zach Lieberman. He was one of the people who I was following long before I got into crypto. He had published some videos on this language, Open Frameworks, which was another kind of generative art programming language or library or framework. And so he's teamed up with Adidas and Prada to do a really interesting drop. That happened on SuperRare, I think about a week ago. And I think this is just a really interesting time for the space. Like we're seeing well-established brands partnering with well-established artists. But I think the difference is that because we have this new layer with NFTs, artists are really getting compensated more fairly for the work that they're doing, right? It's very hard to, the people originating a lot of the interesting ideas and content are the artists. And so I think there's now more equal balance between kind of like the brands treating artists more as partners than somebody they're just contracting out to do work for them. Mm-hmm. It's also surreal, right? When we started 4 years ago, if you had told me that Adidas and Prada were going to team up with one of my favorite artists and drop something on SuperRare, I would have told you were crazy. So, it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, very good, man. So a large part of our audience are going to be retail crypto investors. If they want to help or tap in and kind of, ride this wave with you from an investment perspective, could you talk to us a little bit about the RareToken? What's that all about?
Yeah, well, I can't speak to it from an investment perspective, but I can certainly, give the audience, the viewers, some insights into how we're using the token. So we launched the Rare DAO last summer. So we did a retroactive airdrop to users of the SuperRare platform. And we're really thinking about this token as a new way to curate art and influence the SuperRare network. So kind of like the first thing that we've done with it is build a new so we're launching a new product, calling it SuperRare Spaces. And this is going to be independently curated parts of SuperRare. So this could be, it could be a art collective. Maybe it's a DAO that you started with your friends. You guys think you're good tastemakers. You have artists you want to work with. You guys can do drops using some new tools that we built. And these curators were selected by the token holders. So we held what we called the space race and selected 5. So the token holders selected 5 new curators who are going to use SuperRare and kind of be able to run their own, auction house. They'll essentially be able to work with artists, do drops. It could also be kind of like existing things that you have, in a collection of your own. And we're going to continue to think about how we can use the token to curate artists, in a new and interesting way.
How do you, not that I think you have to sell NFTs to artists, but suppose there's some purist artist out there who's like, no, me, my oil and my canvas, that's all I need. What would you say to somebody like that? How do you sell them on the promise of this stuff? Where's this going, and how do you bring the last generation into the next generation, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, so I mean, early on, even some of the things we thought about, I think there's a really interesting book on the art market. I think it's called Provenance. But just there's actually a big problem with forgery in the art market. If you have a painting that's 100 years old, there's probably nobody who was actually alive when the painting was created. And so you're trusting experts who, may or may not know what they're doing. There's people who have made a very good business creating forgeries. And so, I think one of the better use cases for NFTs is digital art, but it's also interesting to think about it from the perspective of just a digital certificate of authenticity, right? Like if you mint an NFT, you can give your painting an identity, even if you just minted it when you created it and say, here's a picture of the painting I created. It had the timestamp. You could have some other metadata in there. So I think, provenance drives a lot of value in the art world. And so if you just think about the fact that we now have cryptographically secure provenance, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, right on. So I hope, I know I'm very clear on this. I want to make our audience clear as well that SuperRare is aimed very much at, this is an art shop. This is to buy beautiful things and put them on display in virtual spaces. It's not about in-game assets that are stored as NFTs. You're not buying spaceships to play video games with. With that distinction made, I'm still very curious about what kind of thoughts you might have in general about the metaverse. I like to ask people about, in this hypothetical Decentraland versus Sandbox versus Facebook's Meta, what is it going to take for one of these to emerge as the capital M metaverse? Or maybe there's room for everybody to win? I don't know. What do you think? What are we talking about when we talk about the metaverse, John?
Yeah, so I think it's inevitable that there'll be many metaverses, right? I think the metaverse as described in Snow Crash, for example, where it's one place where you go, it's completely immersive. I'm not sure that's the world that I see. I think there'll be many, it's a metaverse of infinite universes. I'm sure there'll be some with better network effects that have, better economies, more usage. But I think it's a spectrum, right? I would argue that, Twitter launched their NFT authentication avatar, and that's part of the metaverse, being able to show off your digital swag and have everybody else know that you truly own it. That's one of the foundational ideas of the metaverse. And so I think it's probably not going to look exactly like we think it is. I think it's, we already experiencing it, right? We're living in virtual worlds. And it's going to be a big spectrum.
So what do we have to look forward to coming up from SuperRare? If I'm just going to put on my imagination hat for a second, I got to imagine that you maybe you're endeavoring to one day get NFTs sold by Christie's or Sotheby's or something like this. What kind of landmark moments are coming up for SuperRare?
Yeah, so I mean, we think our opinion is that the NFT market is going to be an extraordinarily large market, and we're doing everything we can to help that come to fruition. And we kind of view SuperRare as one way to think about it is kind of like the curation layer for NFTs, right? There's going to be trillions of NFTs. So how do you see which ones are interesting, which ones are culturally relevant, which artists are selling the best? And so we've been working on a lot of interesting analytics tooling, also just thinking about what does this look like 5 years down the line when there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of NFTs out there. And we're really trying to build tools that help collectors identify, get connected with artists that they like, and make educated purchasing decisions.
Right on. I'm all out of questions, John, but I want to thank you for your time and your insights here. Any parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I'd just say, for those of you who haven't checked out SuperRare, definitely head on over to superrare.com. And for people who are interested in the DAO, join the Discord, and let's help us make the future of art on the internet.
Right on. That's John Crane, founder and CEO of SuperRare. Thanks for joining us again, John.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.